I'm Neetha Bidway, and this is Good Revenue. Tariff time is back. Global trade tensions are exploding again this week as Davos kicks off. We will also talk about the latest in AI chips, geopolitics, and we'll get into whether or not CEO pay really does pay off for investors and shareholders. If you're new, this is a fact-based podcast, so you will find links and resources to everything we talk about in the show notes. Hit the subscribe button and let's jump right in. Geopolitics between the U.S. and the EU could not be more strained as this week kicks off. The EU has signaled that it is not going to sit back while the president discusses the potential acquisition or invasion of Greenland. I can't believe I'm actually saying that, but that is indeed a top story everywhere right now. The U.S. is threatening new tariffs against European countries that block the president's desire to acquire Greenland, and the EU has consolidated and is said to be preparing retaliatory tariffs of its own to the tune of 93 billion euros. This is all happening as Davos kicks off in Switzerland this week, and I have no doubt that it will be a number of frigid rooms full of executives and world leaders, and we'll stay tuned and come back with an update at the end of the week. The European Union is working on a new spoiler clause as it continues talks with the United Kingdom about a potential trade détente. In the decade since the UK decided to break up with the European Union, things have not gone as well as advocates for leaving the EU had hoped, because it turns out that when you cooperate with close neighbors, it generally provides more economic prosperity for everyone. Just saying that out loud. Now, Brussels is using a new kind of spoiler clause to make it more challenging for the UK to walk away from deals. So they're basically raising the threshold in order to get people to commit and be serious to long-term, mutual, beneficial economic deals. Again, makes sense to me. In negotiations with the United Kingdom, the EU has inserted a termination clause into a post-Brexit deal, and any future UK government that signs the deal would owe significant financial penalties to the EU if they try to break up again. This agreement is meant to cut red tape for British food and drink exporters, but the real innovation is that there is a built-in penalty for political backsliding in the form of significant fees that would be owed to the European Union if the UK has another change of heart. Speaking of tariffs being a terrible idea, U.S. tariffs have been an own goal, as anyone who's had to pay for them or a consumer who has seen prices go up due to the tariffs can also attest. And there's a new economic study from Germany that proves this as well. Here's the data. This new study proves what economists and businesses have been saying for over a year. The 2025 U.S. tariffs are an own goal. American importers and consumers bear nearly the entire cost of tariffs, and foreign exporters are absorbing only about 4% of the tariff burden. The remaining 96% is being passed along to U.S. consumers. Using shipment-level data covering 25 million transactions valued at nearly $4 trillion, the economists found near complete pass-through of tariff costs to U.S. consumers. And you can see this in the data. U.S. customs revenue has surged by $200 billion in 2025, and that tax is being paid by Americans. The economists also studied exports from Brazil and India, and their conclusion is that the price of exports did not change, but export volume did, proving that U.S. consumers are indeed being taxed for the privilege of paying for imported goods. The AI boom is running into two huge headwinds. The first is the fact that Nvidia's growth is being constrained by limitations at TSMC. The Taiwan-based semiconductor manufacturer is critical to what Nvidia is able to deliver. In addition, the president has just announced a 25% tariff on Nvidia's AI chips. in an effort to continue to pressure the firm and others to bring all AI chip manufacturing to the United States. Now, the president's order includes broad exemptions for data centers and for consumer applications, signaling that DC is very much desirous of having leverage over AI chip manufacturers. This will stay in the news. The U.S. and Taiwan have just signed a new trade agreement as Taiwan and TSMC trade domestic manufacturing of AI chips for lower tariffs. Taiwan has agreed to a 15% reciprocal tariff instead of the 20% rate that was previously in place. In exchange, TSMC and the government of Taiwan are committing to investing $250 billion in U.S. semiconductors and manufacturing of AI chips in the United States. Now, previously in 2025, Taiwan also committed to spending $100 billion over the course of 4 years towards a similar goal. Chips and electronics account for 90% of the U.S.-Taiwan trade deficit, meaning that Taiwan is heavily dependent on its exports to the United States, but at the same time, the United States and American companies are also extremely reliant on these sophisticated AI chips and other goods coming from Taiwan. Chinese AI leaders have admitted at a conference in Beijing that they are heavily dependent on access to Nvidia's top AI chips if they want to continue to make progress towards their own AI chip ambitions. U.S. export controls and TSMC bottlenecks have left Chinese AI researchers and leaders jostling for scraps while America pulls ahead in the AI chip race. Elite Chinese AI researchers conceded at a conference in Beijing that the U.S. gap and lead is widening due to chip shortages from export controls. Huawei's 2025 output is limited to 200,000 to 300,000 chips, a far cry from the millions of chips being created by others, including Nvidia and AMD. Chinese firms are also scrambling for access to Nvidia's brand new Vera Rubin chip, as well as that H200 that they say they don't want. And the problem is that all of those chips are effectively committed to American clients or other clients of Nvidia. So again, this fight is going to remain top tier and top of mind for the foreseeable future. It's back to ads for OpenAI and ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT is having a pretty rough month. We talked about this in our last episode, but Google's Gemini is absolutely dominating and growing, while ChatGPT appears to be receding a bit in terms of consumer usage, and we will link to that episode. The latest news, OpenAI is shifting from pure growth mode as they realize they need to actually pay the piper if they want to get that IPO. Now, they're doing this by introducing cheaper tiers of subscription as well as ads inside their chat window. This causes some challenges because OpenAI doesn't have access to a feed like a Meta does, and it doesn't have access to the level of browsing capability and search that Google has, among other competitors. The problem is that using the chat window means that consumer data and information, including sensitive information that people are sharing in their ChatGPT chats, is very likely going to be mined for the benefit of advertisers. And that raises serious privacy concerns, maybe data security concerns. So while ChatGPT is pushing forward with this, if you're in the habit of sharing really personal information with AI robots, you might not want to do as much of that. Supersized CEO pay packages are not paying off for shareholders. New analysis from Equilar, published in the Wall Street Journal, shows that massive 9-figure compensation deals modeled after Elon Musk's deal with Tesla have failed to deliver superior performance for investors at most companies. Among the 20 firms offering such moonshot packages after 2018, firms like KKR, Rivian, Roblox, and Robinhood, 3/4 underperformed the S&P 500 in shareholder returns. Only a handful of these experiments actually yielded exceptional financial outcomes, which is usually the reason and rationale provided by corporate boards that approve these packages. Median CEO pay has risen quite a bit. It's about $16.4 million in recent years. But these mega packages rarely justify themselves through stock gains or value creation, according to Equilar. Boards justify supersized pay as performance linked, but in reality, shareholders often see mediocre results while executives benefit. Another big benefit to CEOs and corporations: the United States has negotiated an exemption for U.S.-based multinational firms from a global tax agreement. And while this might be good in the short term for investors, it's probably a really bad deal for consumers and even for companies in general over the long run. Because one thing we know from tax policy is if you have loopholes, you have arbitrage. Young people are giving up on home ownership, and that is not all. They're also giving up on a lot of what we might call productive life, according to a new economic analysis. New economic model shows what happens when a generation quietly gives up the dream of home ownership and how that cascades through the whole economy. This model projects that people born in the 1990s are going to hit retirement with home ownership rates roughly 9.6 percentage points lower than that of their parents. And the problem here is not just that people aren't able to buy a home, which is a problem, a huge problem. The problem is that once people realize that this goal is not going to be realistic, they change their behavior. The data shows that individuals start to consume more relative to their wealth. It reduces their motivation to work, and it drives them to take on more risky investments. So basically, they give up. The empirical data shows low wealth renters are already mirroring this giving up pattern. They have lower savings, more risk, and weaker labor supply. These responses amplify over the life cycle of individuals, which means that as wealth gaps widen between those who have hope of owning a home and those who don't, the results for these people get worse. This is super problematic and adds to the growing concern about affordability and home ownership and just access to a decent life that we should all be able to enjoy. Propaganda and fake news are all about feelings. Fake news turns out to be less about factual accuracy and more about emotional impact. And some countries around the world are actually teaching their children how to fight propaganda from the time that they are toddlers. New research and field experimentation from Finland shows that misinformation campaigns are really successful because they trigger strong emotions. It's not about the fact that they're having a fact war. Fake news is best understood as content engineered to make you feel afraid, outraged, or victimized, regardless of whether or not the individual claims in the content are accurate. Finnish schools explicitly teach children as young as 3 to question sources, analyze motives, and recognize emotional manipulation, treating media literacy as a primary source of citizen defense against foreign propaganda. And in the case of Finland, they have been dealing with aggression from their neighbor to the east for decades. So this is something they're very familiar with. And I think it's a really interesting strategy on their part to really self-educate and arm their citizenry. Microscopic autonomous robots are real. Who knew? Our last story, one good thing. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Michigan have built the world's smallest, fully programmable autonomous robots. Each one of these micro robots is smaller than a grain of salt, and it can balance on the ridge of a fingerprint. It's powered by light, and these robots carry microscopic computers that can be programmed for complex motion, they can sense temperature, and they can change their paths accordingly. They actually operate without tethers, magnetic fields, or external joystick controls. and they can function for months at the cost of just 1 cent per robot. Now, the potential benefits of this include monitoring within cells. And as someone who grew up watching the movie Inner Space, I thought this was completely amazing. And apparently, movies can really bring reality to life. With that, that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you here very soon. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, leave us a review, subscribe to the show, or check out another episode. We appreciate your support.